Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Congress Comes to You. This is Margaret White, Executive Director at No Labels. It is so wonderful to see so many familiar faces and also some new faces on our call this evening. We are very excited to bring now our third edition of Congress Comes to You to so many faces all around the country. I am honored and delighted to introduce tonight's speaker and moderator, Ron Shaich. Ron is not only the founder of Panera Bread, but also a co-founder of No Labels, one of our earliest believers. So Ron, without any further ado, I'd love to kick it over to you to explain a little bit about what we're doing here tonight, what No Labels is all about, and then we'll hear from some of the Problem Solver Caucus members. So Ron, over to you.
Great. Hey, thank you, Margaret. You know, as you were speaking, it made me think of 10 years ago, the very first No Labels meeting I attended, an office building in downtown Boston. I walked in, Nancy Jacobson was there, a couple of other sponsors. And I don't know about you, but I felt like I was the only person in the country who got the way we were doing this didn't make sense. It struck me, the only interest in DC, the only special interest in DC that wasn't represented was the special interest. And I've watched over 10 years as this organization has evolved and grown. And it's always struck me that there was, that the voice we brought was actually trying to get people to talk to each other and actually come up with solutions that might get enacted and work. It sounds like a revolutionary idea, but at the core, it's what we as citizens completely get. And I must tell you, I've watched No Labels over these 10 years, and there are many times that I wondered, is this ever going to get there? Is anything ever going to happen from this energy and the money and the time we put into it? And I have to tell you, I remember 4 years ago, I attended the first meeting of the Problem Solvers Caucus, and there was a couple of Congress people around, and what struck me was how frustrated they felt with their inability to speak to each other. Republicans who had never spoken to Democrats, Democrats who had never spoken to Republicans, folks who felt like they had no cover by moving to the middle. And I kept remembering, thinking to myself, is this going to work? Is this going to come together? And the truth of the matter is, you felt their frustration, and you started to watch it, and you started to watch it grow. And the truth of the matter is, it has worked. The truth of the matter is that discussion, which began with informal discussions, has led to powerful things. And I just wanted to share with you my perception. We have reached a powerful point. It is particularly impressive. Typically in DC, we're in a situation where things are controlled by the four corners. You know, the Senate Majority Leader, the Senate Minority Leader, the House and Majority and Minority Leaders, the Speaker. They're not talking to each other. They're basically blaming each other and filing bills. And what grew from those informal discussions in the Problem Solvers Caucus is a fundamental commitment to work together, to see if we could talk together and speak together and come up with something. And we have tonight, we have as of Monday, the first real palpable example of our work together. That example is a bill called the SMART Bill, which is meant to deal with aid to states and local governments, to do so, which is not a Republican issue or not a Democratic issue, but an American issue, and to do so in a way in which it's been organized by both Republicans and Democrats and filed simultaneously in the House and in the Senate. And that is powerful because what it represents is a new way of governing, a third force. And that has the potential to make a huge difference in this country and to really bring voice to what we have been fighting for such a long period of time. So tonight we want to talk about that process. We want to hear from the folks that have actually made that happen. We've got a couple of great speakers with us tonight. The co-chairs of the Problem Solvers Caucus, Tom Reed from New York, Josh Gottheimer from New Jersey. We got Abigail Spanberger, who is one of the co-sponsors of the bill. And tonight's an opportunity to hear from them about how this process worked and why this matters. So with that, I thought we might turn it over to them. Maybe we can start with Josh. And my question to you, Josh, if we could, for all those listening, how did we get here? And why does this process matter? And where does it represent a potential to lead us? Josh?
Well, thank you so much, Ron, and it's so good to see everybody. You know, I'm getting to see a lot of familiar faces here as I've now got to do a bunch of these, and I just want to thank all of you for your energy, your enthusiasm, and your remarkable commitment to what we're trying to do, which is actually govern and bring people together across the aisle and put country before party. So I just want to thank you for all your leadership, and Ron for what you're doing to help, and No Labels. I mean, this is an organization that year in and year out stays committed to the principle of getting things done, which is what we need to do in government. And in the Problem Solvers Caucus, which I co-chair with Tom Rito, I think I saw, and I'm trying to find him in one of the boxes, but I saw Abigail Spanberger, who's here, and I think Abigail and I both have our backdrops up of Congress, and what we talk about process. The reason I've got that backdrop up is because last week, or maybe it was the week before last, the group of us in the Problem Solvers Caucus, half Democrat, half Republican, 25 of each, came together on Zoom for a debate about helping our state and local governments. And when I say local, I mean, and Tom Reed, who you'll hear from in a minute, I mean getting down to the smallest communities in our country. Tom represents a bunch of them, I do too, and so does Abigail. You know, rural areas, small areas that are facing huge budgetary hits and have been hit by this virus, both from a health, on the health crisis side, but also the economic crisis. In fact, you'll see me wearing a tie because in a few minutes I have to go, and we're playing, a Boy Scout is playing taps at a veterans home in my district where 80 people have died, 80 veterans have died and hit by the crisis. And more than 90% of those who haven't passed away are infected or have been infected, just to give you a sense of how hard this has hit my district. And I say that because what we have done here together is said, what do we do to make sure that our states and our communities and our counties have what they need to fight this virus? And what we came together right in a virtual setting just like this, Democrats and Republicans in the Problem Solvers Caucus and senators that came here in our bicamerals, and thanks to No Labels brought us together. We started talking and working more than a month ago to pass legislation and introduce legislation that Ron just talked about, that focuses on one thing: getting those resources back to our communities and making sure those resources actually go to helping people. And Tom and Abigail talk more about the specifics of the legislation, but I want you to know that it wouldn't have happened, and we wouldn't have gotten here with Senator Cassidy and Senator Menendez, and of Tom leading away just phenomenally that he always does, with so many of us working with him. It happened really because we came together here, we trusted each other, we built those relationships. And in the caucus, the Problem Solvers Caucus, I can just say they're my closest friends, Democrats and Republicans. It's who I trust the most to work with every week, and things get done because we're focused on actually staying in the room until we get there. And with that, Ron, thank you. And obviously I know Tom will speak, but I just wanted to thank Tom again for his leadership.
Thank you, Josh. Tom?
Well, thanks, Josh. Thanks, Ron. And thank you, Label, for putting this together as you always do. And I just want to follow up what Josh indicated. I mean, what we have been doing in the Problem Solvers Caucus is what I think you want every member of Congress to do. And for Congress to do it, it's hard. And that's to talk to each other, listen to each other, stay in the room, find that common ground, and move forward. And it doesn't mean you give up your ideology. It doesn't mean you shed. I'm a proud Republican. Josh is a proud Democrat. Abigail, a proud Democrat. We stay in the room, though, and we listen to each other and we talk to each other. And this Smart Fund bill that you're referring to is the result of that collaboration now extending over to the Senate. We have had many phone calls through No Labels and offline with Senator Cassidy and Menendez's offices, and making sure that what they're putting together in regards to a compromise position on state and local aid is a bill that we have developed with them, in partnership with them. And it's a bill that is designed to make sure that local governments, as a result of the crisis, the COVID-19 crisis, gets assistance directly from the federal government. We recognize that the states have suffered and continue to suffer, and they got an initial assistance package in the first CARES Act of $150 billion. And remember, larger municipalities with 500,000 people and larger got some assistance in that first package, but the smaller municipalities did not. And so what we did is combine those two together, and we made sure that the issues that were dividing the parties and the bodies on this issue, issues like using the crisis in order to cover pre-existing budgetary crisis, using this as an opportunity to take in money from the federal government to take care of other issues unrelated to the COVID-19 situation. And we did that, and we found a compromise that protects the local governments from the budget shenanigans of the state capitals, make sure that it's related to the COVID-19 situation directly. And by doing that, we are now in a position, by working together, having 6 members in the Senate, 3 and 3 on each side, and now 5 and 5 on the House side, dropping mayor legislation of Senator Cassie Menendez's bill. We're in position to now grow that momentum. And the Problem Solvers Caucus has been integral in getting this package put together, working together. And so now the next step of this process is telling you all about it, mobilizing our grassroots effort to get behind us, ask your members to make sure that they support this legislation, that they co-sponsor this legislation. And we've been working also because of relationships forged here in No Labels and Problem Solvers Caucus with people like the National Governors Association. Larry Hogan, the Republican chair of the National Governors Association, has come to help us in this situation. The National Association of Counties, the U.S. Conference of Mayors, all the stakeholders working together is what this is all about. And so today is another step in the journey of what started 10 years ago, Ron, when we first started this vision. And 4 years ago in particular, we started this Problem Solvers Caucus officially in the House. And I couldn't be prouder of the leadership that Josh Gottheimer has displayed as my Democratic co-chair on the other side of these 25 Democrats and Republicans. People like Abigail Spanberger, who's come to Congress with the right heart, the right commitment, who's on this call with us. And as a Republican, I vouch for Abigail Spanberger. She is a legitimate leader in Washington, D.C., who's proud of what she believes in, but is willing to stay in the room to listen. And so, these are the Problem Solvers Caucus members are inspiring to me. And without your support, we would not be successful. So I just want to thank all of you for taking the time, prioritizing your efforts in regards to backing us up as we continue to change Washington, D.C. for the good.
Josh, we thank you immensely as citizens for your leadership of this and your coming together. Representative Spanberger, could we ask you this? I know you're new to Congress. How have you experienced this as a new approach? Because we believe this is a fundamentally new approach to governing. And that's what's so powerful about this. How do you experience it?
Well, I would say that this is really just what Congress should be, first and foremost. So I was elected in 2018. This is my first term. But before this, my background was in public service. I was a CIA case officer. And so I worked in the national security realm for years. And with my background, it was you focus on a problem, you focus on solving it. What's the information you need to ensure that policymakers or military leaders or diplomats at a negotiation table have the information that they require to make a good and informed decision. And so part of what I campaigned on, I'll be very honest, during the campaign, I spoke often about problem solvers because to me, it's what Congress should be. It should be a group of people who get in a room together and are willing to talk about where they agree, where they disagree, for the purpose of creating good policy. And so when I got to Congress, one of the first things I did was, make sure I got right next to Josh Gottheimer and make it clear that I intended to be a problem solver. And the thing about it is, because we come in 2 by 2, you have to join with another member so that we keep equal numbers, Republicans and Democrats. And in my first year and 5 months in Congress, I would say hands down, the best hour or more of my week when we're in DC and even when we're back in our districts is the time that I spend talking directly with our other problem solvers. Because one, it helps on a variety of fronts. Being able to create relationships and understand, as Tom likes to say, is you stay in the room. We've had really heated arguments. I'm a Democrat, I make no bones about it. But I love to engage in debate and talk to somebody like Tom or any of the other Republicans in the group and say, you know, this is what I think. This is the problem we agree exists. This is my suggestion. This is my pivot. This is my perspective. What do you see? And to be able to have a really engaging debate where you're at that table because you want someone to disagree with you or tell you where they agree and where they disagree. And by virtue of who chooses to be in that room, the conversations are tremendous. And, you know, the legislative progress that I've been able to make as a first-term member of Congress is much in part because of the great relationships that I have with problem solvers, focusing on, you know, USMCA, 5G security, a bill to address lowering the cost of prescription drugs, easing restrictions for our livestock and dairy producers. And I don't know if Dusty Johnson's on the call, but shout out to him if he is. Protecting our children online from predators, and, you know, focusing on things that are important. Some are big topic issues and some are real priorities for my district. And this has been the best. The best aspect of being in Congress is being within this caucus, and I think that Congress will be a lot better for it when we don't have to have a special caucus. The problem solvers is just Congress. So I don't see us getting there quickly, but it won't keep me from trying to make it happen.
I must say, on behalf of all of us citizens, we profoundly thank you for your leadership. Thank you. Okay, so maybe this is the time to open it up to Q&A. The way to do that is essentially to use the hand raising function. I think if you know, at the bottom of Zoom, you'll see that there's an opportunity to raise your hand or chat. If you want to chat, you send it to Margaret, Margaret White directly. She'll cue us on the questions. And I know our first question already in is coming from John Leonard. John, could you unmute your device and speak, please? Raise your question.
Thank you, Mr. Shaich. Thank you for your leadership, and thank all the problem solvers for your great leadership. John Leonard in Raleigh, North Carolina. What are your top, I know you've already said this a little bit, but what are your top 3 recommended items that no labels people like us can do on a regular basis every week to support the problem solvers members like yourselves and help you get things done in Congress, regardless of whether we live in your state or in your district?
Well, Ron, if you want to take a swipe at that and then turn it over to Abigail. Top 3 things I would do is, one of the things that we have a hard time doing is because of the nature of the messaging that goes on out there in regards to the 24/7 news cycle and other platforms. Exposing your social media networks to us, linking to our Problem Solvers Caucus social media platforms, spreading our word. Because I can tell you, Josh and I go on national TV, or Abigail go on national TV, and they don't want to talk to us about where we came into agreement. They want to always they talk to us in our little ear as we go on TV, and they're like, that's great, you guys solved something, but where did you fight? And I know Josh may have to leave here shortly. So Josh, I don't know if you wanted to say anything before you left. No, I guess he's already going to his event. And so what I would ask you to do is every week expose the Problem Solvers Caucus social media platform to your platforms. Network, raise our bully pulpit, raise that bullhorn that you have access to. Link to us, follow us as members, follow us as the caucus members. The other thing I would do is, if you're in a district where you don't know if your member is part of the caucus, ask them, ask her or him why they're not, that you expect them and demand them to govern this way. And so send us new recruits that you can vouch for. And if you know of someone maybe who's not in your district that you think is a good member and that we should be talking to, tell us about him or her so that we can go and identify them. And on that next point too, I would say identify candidates that you're talking to and that you can put on our radar so that we can help them. No Labels does a great job of highlighting candidates. We do candidate recruitment as chairman of the Problem Solvers Caucus, and the members themselves will bring us candidates. So I would do those three things to help us grow this organically from the grassroots up. And if we can do that together, then I think we'll have an opportunity to pierce through. And I think we will also ignite that silent majority voice of America that is saying this is what they want in Congress, this is what they want, and members of Congress. And it's about having that voice be raised to a level that pierces through the screaming and yelling of division of Washington, D.C.
We want you to solve problems, not blame.
Amen.
Amen. Abigail, do you have a comment, or should we move on?
I'll just add very briefly, because I think when I was campaigning, which for the first time was more recently than my dear colleague Tom, it was amazing to me how many people had just pulled away from politics. Politics is too angry. Politics is too divisive. Politics is, insert a negative adjective. And so I would also add, John, there's an aspect where, we work to work with each other. We work to find common ground. We disagree fervently on many, many topics, but we do so with respect for the fact that that person came to the table and wanted to talk to us. And so I think, honestly, there's an element even within our own communities where community members can try. Sometimes people say, oh, I like, other like-minded people. We'll seek out people who are not like-minded and endeavor to engage in political debates where it's a discussion and it's meant to be eye-opening, and you may not agree at the end, but that's not the point. And I think, frankly, for some of us, there are some problem solvers who don't kind of wear their participation in the caucus nearly as proudly or as openly, because not in all districts is it accepted that you're willing to go into the room with the other party. And that, there's Democrats who are a little bit more private about their problem solver association. There's Republicans the same way, because, to Tom's point, like, I'm a strong Democrat. He's a strong Republican. It doesn't mean that we just sort of mush in the middle. It means that we work for what we believe in, and we accept and dig through each other's differences as a way to create strong, sustainable policy and to actually govern. And so I think the more that we see those sorts of conversations, even just happening within our communities, the more that it will be the requirement of legislators to get together and to have the sorts of conversations and work on the legislation the way that we do.
It's really sad when people are embarrassed to talk and learn. All right, with that, let's move to Dori Dugan, and we've got a lot of questions coming in, so we're gonna do them one after another. Dori?
Hi, I just want to say that I think my question might have been answered, but I am just gonna say that there are people on this call tonight who have never really learned a lot about no labels. Some of us have been on this mission to talk about bipartisanship for the last 10 weeks. Some have been on for the last 10 years. But those people who are on for the first time tonight, I really want to bring them in. And I really want them to go to the No Labels website, to go to the No Labels Facebook page, and to really want to learn more about this. So I guess I'm asking you, as congressional reps, how do you talk to people right now who are on this call and say to them, you really need to get on board?
Thank you, Dori.
Dori, you've been a great leader. I know how hard you worked and met you many a times over the years, and I just wish I appreciate what you do. I'll tell you what Dori's talking about is it is so easy for us not to get engaged. It is so easy for us to stay in our comfort zone, and it's so easy because we're so busy with our family, with our businesses, with loved ones, what have you, to just say, it doesn't matter. And you see it more and more, disengagement, cynicism. And so what you need to do, in my humble opinion, is re-engage and get your neighbors to re-engage, and not re-engage in regards to that comfort zone of, okay, let's just watch it from afar and you got to vote and all that. But voting once every 4 years, voting once every 2 years is not enough. Our country is being torn apart by the extremes on the left and the right. And that is the voice that is getting the response through cable TV, regular TV, media sources. And it's playing into this polarization that's further tearing the country apart. I mean, I've been around, so for about 10 years now. We came in right after the 2008 Great Recession. I lived through 9/11, as many of you did, in regards to this. And usually when the country faces a crisis such as this, the country comes together. The country sheds its party platforms, sheds its blue and red shirts, and puts on the red, white, and blue, as Pete Stauber, a Problem Solvers Caucus member from Minnesota, says. That's what we need now. And right now, as we're going through a crisis, the first 3.5 bills that we put together, phase 1, 2, 3.5, it was all driven by Problem Solvers Caucus initiatives. It was all driven. We were the first ones invited to the White House, to the Situation Room, by the Vice President. Mike Pence had us come to the Situation Room the night that Debbie Birx landed 10 hours earlier for the first time that she got introduced to the country. We were meeting with them in the Situation Room to discuss, we have to come together as a country to deal with this crisis. And we went around the White House and we said, you know what? These are the moments where we stand together as Americans. But as you can see, as we go through this process, that partisanship, that polarization is coming back into the picture. And we have to fight it. And we have to fight this crisis as Americans, and we got to fight for our future together. And so engage, get engaged in No Labels, engage with us as Problem Solvers Caucus, link to us, talk to us. And I will tell you, if we're together and we're united, the silent majority is going to demand our country go down a different path than the path that's been going down for the last 30 years.
All right, we're going to do a quick question and answer, and we'll take the next question to Rep. Spanberger. Let's go with it, if we could, Al Smith. Good name.
How do we reduce? Oh, I'm sorry. Am I unmuted? Yeah.
Yes.
I think
Yeah, you're great.
How do we reduce the power of the top 4 people in Congress who I feel have entirely too much power? And they do not set, for me, a great example by finger pointing, and it's the we, they every time I see them on television. So how do we reduce their power so that the rank and file have more of a say and Congress represents all of us?
Oh, this is a good one.
We saved the easy ones for you.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. You know, I would agree. I think that congressional leadership in the Senate and the House has entirely too much power to drive the totality of the agenda. And the thing about seniority in the House of Representatives is you get it by being there for a very long time. And as a member, I was elected, I'm a Democrat. I was elected in a district. I'm the first Democrat elected since 1968. So I have a very middle of the road district. My district voted for Trump by 7 points. So just to give a scope of what my district looks like, longevity alone, I think, creates a circumstance where people who are in very blue districts or very red districts find themselves in Congress for a lot longer. And the longer I think that you're in Congress, or the more you're serving your constituents, a constituency that might be very different from a district like mine, I think that creates some real challenges. So I'm kind of acknowledging aspects of your question, Al, but I think one of the root causes is just how one works that path towards leadership. I think that members like myself, like Tom, need to expect more when we're voting for leadership. And I'll point to last year, the Problem Solvers, and I wasn't yet in the organization or in the caucus at that point in time, but the existing members went to the presumed potential Speaker of the House and made certain demands that they wanted to have. What we have now is the 290 rule. So the 290 rule is, if you get 290 co-sponsors, you get priority of a bill to go to the floor. And 290 co-sponsors is a lot of co-sponsors. And this may seem really arbitrary, but in fact, by pushing to say, we're going to take a little bit of power. So if a Republican member, if Tom Reed has a bill he loves, and it is amenable to people on different sides of the aisle, and he can get 290 co-sponsors, that bill can't be blocked by committee leadership that doesn't like it. That bill can't be blocked by a Speaker of the House of a different party. That bill will get to the floor. And it's a huge hurdle to get 290, but it gives a bit of authority and a bit of responsibility to a member, be they of the minority party or frankly, a newer member like me, where I don't have the same ability to get my bills to the floor as quickly, you know, as someone who's been working on a bill for 5-6 years. It's ahead of me in line. And so I think that was one thing that the problem solvers in making requests or requirements of a potential speaker, there were a number of people who said, these are rules changes we want to see made, or we won't cast our speaker vote a particular way. I think that's valuable and helpful in terms of pulling things. I'm actually been spending a lot of time thinking about this, you know, assuming that my party will be in the majority again. Sorry, Tom. I do think about what are the things that I think are important in a speaker. What are things where we are demonstrating a Congress of both parties, you know, even if I am quite pleased that my particular party happens to be in the majority, where can you give a voice to the minority to avoid, you know, sometimes we have antics in Congress where there's these procedural votes that it's just the minority party kind of poking at the majority party. And when the Democrats are in the majority, it's the Republicans poking, and, you know, it flips the other way. But it's not, it has no legislative benefit, right? It is actually a distraction and a problem when you're on the floor trying to pass good legislation, that they're trying to poke legislation. So there was a little bit of a longer answer to say there's not one direct way, but I think it starts with members expecting more and expecting some changes in the way that we see leadership. And at least I can speak for the House of Representatives and what I think would work there. The Senate is a different animal. I don't know. Tom, would you add anything?
I would just add maybe a historical perspective. The reason why the top four now have all the power is part of a bigger problem too, is that Congress has delegated its authority to the executive branch as a general institution. It's an easier path. It's easier to have the president do everything and Congress just kind of sit over there and blame the presidency, and it happens on both sides of the party who happens to be in the presidency. So then it kind of doesn't make Congress a co-equal branch. It's kind of, you know, okay, who's left over are the top four leaders making all the decisions, because that's who the executive branch needs to get on their side in order to execute their agenda, and the executive branch already has that authority. So bringing more of that responsibility and authority back to Congress is critical to balancing this out and taking that power back to the members as opposed to just the leadership. But the bigger issue is what Abigail touched upon. And I can remember vividly, Newt Gingrich and Charlie Rangel and I served on Ways and Means. And Charlie served on Ways and Means, was chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, very senior committee in the House of Representatives. He said it best in one of our meetings. We were talking about how the rules of the House had become such that all the power, Newt started it with bringing the power to the Speaker's office and disempowering members, disempowering the committees, and giving it all to the Speaker's office. And Charlie piped right up and he's like, yeah, you know, Tom, Newt started it, Nancy perfected it. And so it was a Democrat and Republican creation of power into the top offices because it was easier. It was easier to do that, and members were okay with it. Now members are starting to rear their head, and that's where we got the rules reform package from last go around, because we demanded more speakers to say, you know what, you have to give some of that power back to the members. And so as we go into the next speaker's election, when we go into the next congressional session, I think we're going to build off of that. And I say that not just because it needs to be done, but because now members are tasting this 290 consensus calendar, and there's senior members in Congress that have come up to me and said, you know what, we were deathly afraid of what you guys were doing, but it's actually making a better institution. It's allowing members to get to know each other, start to develop trust with each other. And a lot of members are coming off the sidelines to us going, you know what, we need to do more of that. And I will tell you, there are potential candidacies out there for speakers that I think are noodling this around going, you know, maybe I can run as a speaker. Oh my gosh, say it out loud. Give up some of his or her power back to make the institution better to the members and to the committees. So stay tuned, as there's a lot of us discussing round 2 of these rule reforms that the consensus calendar was born out of in order to do just what you're talking about, letting members and the process of democracy. You'd be amazed that really 4 people are making decisions for 325 million people. And when they're passing trillions of dollars of legislation right now, that was why we had the whole reform of the virtual Congress and having that congressional debate that Josh talked about in his opening remarks that was so important. You know, they're not even debating these issues anymore. It's just 4 people in a room cutting deals. And I'll just tell you, it's not good for the Democratic Republic for that to be the case.
This is partly what we're here to help solve. Okay, let's move on from there to Paul Connery. I know he has a good question. We got about 5 minutes left, 2 questions to go. Paul?
Thank you. I'm from Connecticut. I read an article in the New York Times today. It talked to the other bills that are being introduced. Why isn't your bill getting the exposure that I think it deserves out there in the media?
And I think, let's start with Tom this time.
Yeah, okay. It did get some coverage. It's building with momentum. As you watch the progression of this issue of state and local aid, this is going to be a cornerstone debate going into the Phase 4 CARES Act 2 piece of legislation that's going to come together around the middle of June. So stay tuned. We set the foundation, we set the alignments, we set the stakeholders together. And I will tell you the attention of it is going to grow and grow and grow because state and local aid is going to be one of the top 3 issues that has to be dealt with in regards to the next package. So understand it, that hasn't had the same attention maybe that you picked up on, but I can tell you over the last 72 hours, we've had a lot of attention on it. And I will also tell you, a lot of what we do in the Problem Solvers Caucus is the nuts and bolts. We're not show horses, we're workhorses. And so not often do we pride ourselves on being in the splashy media. We're more about getting what is done, what is needed to get done for the American people. And so that is also another reason why we need your pulpit, so that when we pull the trigger on a piece of legislation like this, you have networked together a social media platform that outdoes the New York Times, that outdoes the Wall Street Journal, because you're all mobilizing millions of people through the power of the internet and the power of networking.
Thank you, Tom. Okay, let's go to Chuck Wolfe, and then I'll take a last question. Go ahead.
Thank you.
Chuck?
Thank you both for being with us tonight. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay.
Perfect.
Thanks. I have a question that is based on how specific can you be in helping us to help you with this idea of changing for a speaker to give up some power. We've got some time to plan for that. I don't expect you to answer that right now, but I'd like you to think about it. And also, Representative Spanberger, you talked about an issue that we're struggling a bit with. We'd like, at least some of us on this call would like to be able to be helpful in primaries. But we worry, at least with some districts like your own, that if we come out and we say how important it is, Democrats and Republicans both support you, that's going to cause some people who are Democrat not to want to vote for you. And so we're trying to balance that. We're trying to find a way to kind of find a way to be more helpful as specifically as we can in any way that you think it makes sense and and is within the rules of what we're allowed to do. So many of us would be very interested in, once we identify you as somebody that is a statesperson and not just an elected official, somebody that really does put country over party, we want to help keep you there. So if you could be as specific as possible, and even if it's not tonight, maybe the next time, but just something that is really grounded in concrete things and actions that we can all take. Thank you.
Well, I'll take a sort of immediate, my gut response to your question is that it needs to grow out of a general commitment to governing and to creating long-term solutions to monumental issues and challenges facing our country. And so I think that, if you typically fashion yourself a Republican, find Republican candidates who are along those lines. And if you're typically a Democrat, do that. If you are more independent and it's issue focused or person focused, then look for the candidates who appeal to the things that are important to you. But I think the way that we create this conversation and help candidates and help recruit people who are actually working to govern is, I think Tom said, we're workhorses, not show horses. Sometimes it's difficult to run with the message of like, I'm really going to work hard, right? Because you got to do TV commercials and you got to be interesting and people have to want to support you financially and with their votes. And so I think part of what individuals can do in different places, besides contributing to candidates that may align with what you want to see in Congress, is just even push the idea that this is the sort of prioritization of good governing, of a pragmatic focus on actually achieving things that's valuable. And talking about that. And I think that there's a challenge at times as it relates to bipartisanship. And I've had, folks in my district, because the Lugar Center just came out with their bipartisan score. And I'm the 5th most bipartisan Democrat by the new scores. And, I'm proud of that, because that meant that it's not necessarily just how I vote, it's the fact that with my legislation, I went out and I got Republican co-sponsors, because to me, it's actually very important to present a piece of legislation that can attract Republicans, because if it can attract Republicans in the House of Representatives, ideally it'll attract Republicans in the Senate, which I'm going to need if that bill's ever going to become law. And so there's a simplicity to the notion that in a two-party system, we can disagree and we can fight and debate, but if we actually want to create sustainable policy, we need to get to a place where we can pull over some, not all, but some of the folks on the other side of the aisle. And so I think my bit of a long-winded answer to your question is I think it starts with changing people's expectation of what Congress should be. I think it's changing the way you engage with candidates. If a candidate's kind of railing hyper partisan and angry in a way that's divisive, they campaign that way, they're going to govern that way. And that's not to say you can't be a fierce, committed, insert your party, but there's a difference between being a fierce, committed person of a particular party ideology and just denigrating folks that disagree with you. And I think that changing the way we campaign to a respectable degree is part of changing the tenor of how we act in Congress.
Thank you.
And on the issue of how to change and maybe some additional reforms, I would look to the internet on the Break the Gridlock package that we put together that got the consensus going. Those we compromised in regards to getting not everything we put together in regards to that rules reform package. So I would start there as ways that we're going to take power back to the respective members and to the committees. We are also working, a group of us as members are looking at the rules now to see what we can build off of in regards to that success, where we can apply some of this to the committee process of inside DC so that you are guaranteed votes in committee, you're guaranteed votes when you can identify and get so many different co-sponsors, bipartisan support. And so we're now taking that success of Break the Gridlock and not only going back and trying to get more of the reforms that we didn't get the first go around, using that as a beginning building block, and then build some additional reforms that we've thought about over the last year and a half, where we can actually force amendments to be accepted, to force debate that is not just choreographed and scripted, that is the political theater of Washington, D.C., that is more free-flowing, and you're rewarded for doing that. And there's ways to change the institutional rules, which are like your bylaws or like your organization operational rules. By doing that, I think you're going to see a lot more of this reform come through the system as we go into it. There's going to be a new speaker election. It's going to be a whole new slate of leadership in the next Congress and the next Congress after that. So this is about chipping it away and incrementally. You're not going to get it all in one bite. You're going to have to keep on going back. The Ronald Reagan, you take 80% of the loaf, you celebrate and that's a victory, not a defeat. And then you survive the day to keep on going and rolling up your sleeves and blocking and tackling to get the rest of it. And that's where we're at with Break the Gridlock number 2.
Hey, Tom, you lead probably into the last question I'd like to ask. It sort of connects, and I think we want to get these folks back to the joys of isolation. But at any rate, my question is this. I personally have felt for a very long time, that I could see the problems, but there was no way I could make a difference as one individual. And I know there are tens of millions of our fellow citizens that feel that way. I also know there are hundreds of folks that are on this phone call tonight. And my question to you and Abigail, for all of us, how do we help you in this process? What can we do to help make a difference?
Doing what you're doing tonight, engaging, don't become cynical, get 5 or 10 of your friends, the power of that exponential growth of networking that you see. Facebook is, the best example of that in the internet age. Start networking that further and further. And also recognize, remember, in most votes in elections, if you look at the turnout, typically 40% turnout is like a high turnout, especially in primaries where 20% of the turnout is what drives the electorate. That means the silent majority, 60% to 80% of the electorate is staying home. We need to do the hard work of going and pulling that silent voice and giving it a voice, giving it a platform. And if you just do the exponential growth, like what we're talking about here, you'll be able to overcome these election results just by being out organized, out networked, and being much more rifle approach in your discipline in order to get this in a different position.
Abigail, I don't know if you want to add anything. Or
I would add, just briefly, I would add, we've talked a lot about sort of the principles of Problem Solvers Caucus and some of the structural challenges in Congress and the way that we're reacting to them. But I would also point you all to some of our major initiatives, some of the pieces of legislation focused on H-2A visas and immigration reform. We took a bipartisan trip, the only bipartisan trip that I'm aware of, to the border last summer and committed to each other. We're going to go together. We're going to spend this time together, and we're going to sit down in our hotel after all of our tours of all of these places, and we're going to talk about what are the problems and how do we fix them. Looking at the pieces of legislation that we've actually moved on and the things that we've engaged and pursued, I think that some of the ideas and the philosophies that we've talked through are rather appealing, but to actually also then be able to talk about, like, look at what they've been able to do. Look at how they've partnered on legislation. Here's an example of, there's this insurmountable problem that everybody likes to use as a political bludgeon. Look at this group that said no more, let's try and get at the root causes of this. And I had a bill that was legislation signed into law, bipartisan, focused on addressing narco trafficking and human trafficking throughout Central America as a root cause and contributor to the immigration challenges we see at the border. The House passed an H-2A, the Agricultural Workforce Modernization Act, as another example of, let's take a piece of this larger problem that people just want to kind of use as a political hot potato. Let's actually try to take a piece of it and fix it. And then, as Tom mentioned, we were at the Situation Room with the Vice President and Dr. Birx the day right after she arrived, talking about coronavirus and what we were going to see. But that was actually the third so far trip of problem solvers over to the White House. Our first was, I think it was a week and a half into my first term in Congress, went to the White House and met with the president to talk about the government shutdown. And we went as a group of Democrats and Republicans who were carrying the message that this shutdown needs to end. Here are the stories of the constituents. What do we need to do to get there? And I think being able to tell some of these stories is a powerful way to give the example of the fact that this idea of people can work together, that sounds a little bit, Pollyanna, that in reality, it's working, and in reality, it's actually leading to good legislation.
Thank you. All right, then with that, let me just add 2 notes of conclusion. First, I just want to thank Josh, who's moved on to his other event, Tom, Abigail. You guys are stars, and I want you to know, on behalf of No Labels, we have your backs, and we very much appreciate you're taking the risks of reaching across the aisle, and we understand what that means. The second thing I just want to reiterate is we have made real progress with the SMART legislation. It is the first piece of bicameral, both the House and the Senate, and bipartisan legislation that's been introduced. It's a new way to govern. It's what we've been trying to get to. It's what we need to get to. And the important point is we need your support. We know labels need your support in supporting our SMART process, SMART Solutions campaign. It's out there. It's on social media. You know our social media tagline. Spread it, get the word out. And every bit as importantly, push on your reps, push on your senators to support the SMART bill. With that, on behalf of No Labels, I'll say good night. And once again, thank you to all of you for what you're doing for this country. Good night.
Thank you. Thank you, Ron.
Good night.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Have
you.
a wonderful night. Stay safe.
Stay safe and healthy.